The hidden curse of being an intuitive introvert. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Carl Jung. On Spiritual Wisdom, we invite you to explore the mysterious world of intuitive introverts, those who sense everything beneath the surface but are often dismissed or misunderstood. Their silence hides a profound inner knowing, and their isolation is often the result of seeing what others cannot. If you've ever felt too deeply, known too much without explanation, or carried the weight of unspoken truths, this video is for you. These insights are not just observations, they are tools for your personal awakening. Apply them to your daily life and watch how clarity, peace, and inner strength begin to grow. Have you ever felt unseen despite your deep awareness? Comment below and share your story. Your voice matters more than you know. Let's awaken together. 1. The curse. 2 realities and the psychological toll. Most people navigate life relying on what they can see, measure, and explain. But you, as an intuitive introvert, move through the world guided by a deeper frequency, one that senses energy shifts, hidden emotions, symbolic patterns, and unspoken truths. You don't just read words, you feel intention. You don't just observe events, you absorb meaning. In every room, you notice what's off before anyone else does. You pick up on subtle cues, a forced smile, a tone of voice that doesn't match the words, a silence that speaks louder than sound. Carl Jung spoke of this inner world, a realm governed not by logic, but by archetypes, the unconscious, and the soul's quiet language. But the burden of this gift is heavy, because the world doesn't believe what it can't prove. When you speak your truth, people question your sanity. When you try to warn someone, they laugh it off until your prediction comes true. And by then, the emotional damage is already done. This creates a psychological split. 2 realities living within you. One is shared with the masses, practical, observable, rational. The other is your private knowing, where intuition speaks louder than facts. And this dual perception slowly wears you down. You begin to feel like an outsider, too strange to be understood, too deep for surface-level relationships. You crave authenticity, yet the more you reveal, the more misunderstood you become. There's a loneliness in seeing what others can't, in carrying emotional burdens that no one recognizes, in speaking truths that others reject. The more attuned you are to this unseen world, the more alienated you feel in the visible one. Jung warned of this very experience, that those who are gifted with deeper insight often suffer the most because they live at the edge of what society is ready to understand. You might find yourself retreating from people, not because you dislike them, but because you can feel their chaos before they even open their mouth. Crowded rooms make your nervous system ache. Small talk becomes unbearable. You're not rude, you're overwhelmed. Your mind is always processing. Your heart is always absorbing. You may try to numb your gift, to pretend not to notice, to play along. But repression only leads to fragmentation. The more you deny what you sense, the more disconnected you become from yourself. Jung taught that individuation, the journey toward wholeness, requires us to embrace, not exile, the parts of us that don't fit the mold. Your sensitivity is not a flaw. It's the language of your soul. Your knowledge is not delusion. It's data that others have forgotten how to read. This spiritual responsibility asks you not to harden, but to protect. Not to silence yourself, but to speak more clearly. Not to shrink, but to honor your perception with boundaries and discernment. The path of the intuitive introvert is not easy. It is sacred. You are here to see what others ignore and to remind them, when the time is right, of what they have forgotten. This isn't about proving anything. It's about living in alignment with your own inner compass. Trust what you feel, even when no one else does. And when in doubt, return to Jung's wisdom. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. That awakening is your curse, but it is also your gift. Let it guide you. 2. The gift. Intuitive perception beyond the norm. They move through the world as if they were born with an extra sense that doesn't rely on eyes or ears, but on the silent whispers of the soul. They feel when something is off long before it shows. They wake from dreams, carrying the emotional weight of events that haven't happened yet, only to see them unfold days or weeks later. They sit in rooms and immediately know who's pretending, who's hurting, who's hiding something behind a smile. And yet, when they try to speak it, they are met with disbelief, discomfort, or silence. Carl Jung called this introverted intuition a function not of logic, but of the unconscious. It's not a guess. It's a deep, soul-based perception that reaches beyond facts and into patterns, energies, and truths not yet spoken. These men are not imagining things. Their inner world is simply more developed, more attuned. They live not only in the physical world, but in the symbolic one, a place filled with archetypes, emotions, and meaning that others don't even notice. This dual existence becomes both a gift and a torment. On one hand, they can sense when something's wrong in a relationship before the first fight. They can feel the future shifting before a decision is made. They know when someone's lying, even when the words are perfect. But on the other hand, they are often forced to keep it to themselves. Because when a man says, "I just know," and there's no evidence, people pull away. They question him. They mock him. And slowly, he starts to question himself. But the truth is that knowing comes from a deeper place, from the unconscious, from the soul's connection to something larger. He isn't guessing. He's receiving. And in a world that worships certainty and proof, that kind of soul wisdom becomes lonely. Still, it doesn't go away. It keeps showing up, quietly, persistently, asking to be trusted. These men often suffer in silence. They sense betrayal before it comes, danger before it arrives, endings before they're acknowledged. They see the truth behind the mask, and they carry the burden of awareness that others ignore. It's not easy to live with a soul that's always listening, always translating what others cannot see. But it's not madness. It's not overthinking. It's not a weakness. It's a spiritual intelligence, a silent genius rooted in the unconscious, shaped by energy, and driven by meaning rather than noise. Carl Jung understood this. He knew the intuitive man would be misunderstood, even feared, not because he was dangerous to others, but because he threatened the illusion of control. Because while others rely on what they can prove, the intuitive man relies on what he knows deep down, even when there are no words. And this knowledge isn't just about reading people. It's about alignment. His soul doesn't tolerate fake friendships, hollow goals, or toxic environments. He walks away from what drains him, not because he's weak, but because he can feel the cost of staying. His life becomes a spiritual path, guided not by rules, but by resonance. And that's where his power lies. Not in convincing others, but in honoring his own inner compass. Because when he trusts that silent voice within, he no longer needs approval. He no longer chases validation. He simply moves, quietly, soulfully, in harmony with what only he can feel. And that is his greatest strength. Have you ever just known something without being able to explain why? If you've experienced those intuitive flashes through dreams, gut feelings, or subtle energy shifts, share your story in the comments so others can connect. And if you're just beginning to explore this gift, comment, "I will trust my intuition," to commit to your inner journey. 3. Jung's psychological framework. Carl Jung identified 4 core functions of the psyche: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. And for intuitive introverts, it's intuition that governs their inner compass. But because sensation is their weakest function, they often feel ungrounded, detached from the physical world, as if they're drifting between dimensions that others can't see. They're not just imagining things, they're decoding the invisible. They enter a room and instantly know who's lying, not by words or gestures, but because their inner world lights up with truth. They dream of heartbreaks before they happen, feel a shift in someone's energy before betrayal is revealed, and sense when something is off, even when everyone else sees calm. But when they try to express these truths, they're met with suspicion, pity, or laughter. The very thing that gives them spiritual sight isolates them. It's not that they're wrong, it's that the world is blind to what they see. Their perception isn't linear, it's symbolic, emotional, energetic. They live through metaphor and synchronicity, receiving information from dreams, gut feelings, and passing thoughts that carry weight others can't feel. The curse isn't their insight, it's the burden of not being believed. They're labeled overly sensitive, dramatic, or weird, not because their intuition fails, but because it surpasses normal comprehension. They sense the storm while the sky is still blue. They pull away from people everyone else adores because something deep inside them says, "Be careful." And months later, the truth comes out, but by then, the intuitive has already carried the weight in silence. Jung once said, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." And for intuitive introverts, that awakening can feel more like exile. Their inner clarity is sharp, but the outer world demands evidence. It demands logic where only energy speaks. And so they shrink. They second guess. They doubt what they feel just to be accepted by those who can't even feel themselves. But the truth remains. Their intuition is not a glitch. It is a spiritual design. It's a sacred system tuned to frequencies most people have long forgotten. And yet, because they can't show it, can't prove it, they often try to suppress it. They try to be normal, to dismiss the knowing, to stay silent in meetings, in friendships, in love. But the cost of that suppression is spiritual exhaustion. They weren't built for small talk and surface truths. They were built to see through, to feel into, to awaken others by simply existing as they are. Their presence is prophetic, even if no one around them understands why. This is why the intuitive introvert feels both gifted and burdened, both wise and invisible. They see the soul behind the smile, the fear behind the brag, the future in the fragments. But in a world addicted to certainty, their mystery feels like madness. And still, they return to themselves. Because deep down, they know the soul doesn't need permission to speak. It only needs to be trusted. If this insight into Jung's framework helped you better understand your intuitive strengths and your struggles with staying grounded, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your reflections in the comments below. Let's continue uncovering the deeper layers of the mind together. 4. The 3 psychological traps. Most people don't understand that for intuitive introverts, the gift of deep perception often feels more like a heavy cross than a superpower. It's not just about reading between the lines. It's about being unable to turn off your inner radar. You don't just see things, you sense them in your soul. You feel the lies no one admits. You absorb the moods no one speaks. And you carry the tension others refuse to name. You're not guessing you know, but that knowledge isolates you. Carl Jung warned, your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. Yet even awakening has its shadows. And for intuitive souls, those shadows can become traps if they're not consciously recognized and mastered. The first trap is archetypal inflation. When you begin to identify too strongly with spiritual roles like the prophet, the healer, or the visionary. It starts subtly. You offer guidance. People listen. You feel validated. But over time, the ego confuses itself with the archetype. You stop being a man with a soul and start believing you are the archetype itself. You become the message rather than its vessel. And though it feels powerful, it quietly separates you from reality, from humility, from growth. You stop relating to others as equals and begin operating from a pedestal no one asked you to stand on. The soul becomes consumed by its own reflection and forgets its purpose. Then comes psychic contamination, the most exhausting part of being deeply intuitive. You can't help but absorb other people's energy, their grief, fear, insecurity, until you can't tell what's yours and what's theirs. You might wake up sad and not realize it's your partner's unspoken anxiety. You might feel suffocated after a meeting and not realize your nervous system has absorbed everyone's stress. You walk around like an emotional sponge, heavy and saturated. And unless you know how to spiritually cleanse, protect, and separate your energy, your soul slowly gets buried under burdens it was never meant to carry. You become tired, irritable, lost in emotions that were never born inside you. But perhaps the most deceptive trap is possession by the unconscious. This is when your inner world becomes so loud, so symbolically charged, that you start living more in dream logic than grounded reality. You see signs in everything. A crow becomes a prophecy. A coincidence becomes a command. You start waiting for the universe to speak instead of making decisions. You stop acting and start watching, interpreting every single thing as if it's part of some divine chessboard. It feels spiritual, but it's actually disorienting. Without balance, even the deepest soul can drown in its own mysticism. These 3 traps, archetypal inflation, psychic contamination, and unconscious possession, don't mean there's something wrong with you. They mean your soul is deeply tuned, and like any finely tuned instrument, it needs care, precision, and awareness. To walk this path is to learn how to feel deeply without losing yourself, how to sense truth without abandoning logic, and how to carry light without burning out. The intuitive soul is not here to escape reality. It's here to illuminate it. And that requires not just sensitivity, but strength, discernment, and above all, grounded spiritual maturity. Do any of these psychological traps feel familiar to you? Comment, "I've been there," if you've experienced them, or "Still exploring," if you're just starting to recognize them. And if this gave you clarity, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss what's coming next. 5. Stage 1. The gift feels magical. You discover your gift when you're still young, long before you have the words to explain it. You feel what others are hiding. You know when someone's lying, even if their face shows nothing, and you can sense what's coming before it arrives. You see connections others miss between people, events, energy, and outcomes. At first, it feels magical, like you're chosen, touched by something divine. There's a thrill in knowing what others don't, in watching situations unfold exactly as you foresaw. But soon, that thrill turns to confusion. When you try to share what you feel, people dismiss it. They say you're too sensitive, too dramatic, or just imagining things. You begin to question yourself, not because you're wrong, but because you're alone in what you see. This is what Carl Jung spoke of when he explored the intuitive type, those whose perceptions stem not from logic, but from the soul's deeper sensing. You walk into a meeting and instantly know who's manipulating the conversation, who's afraid, who's about to quit. You sense relationships unraveling before a word is said. You dream of disasters before the headlines break. But when you speak up, they laugh, brush it off, or worse, look at you like you've lost your mind. So you stop sharing, not because the visions stop, but because the disbelief cuts deeper than silence. You withdraw, not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. The more awake your soul becomes, the more blind the world around you feels. In a society obsessed with logic, your spiritual radar becomes a burden. Your gift isolates you. You walk through life knowing too much, feeling too much, and carrying the weight of truths no one else will claim. A friend once said his marriage was fine, but I saw it unraveling in his nervous laughter, the way he avoided eye contact when she was mentioned. I knew he was pretending, and months later, when it all fell apart, he asked how I knew. I didn't know how, I just felt it. That's the reality of the intuitive introvert. You're not guessing. You're tuned into something ancient and unspoken. Carl Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart." But clarity can be isolating. You're the one who notices the shift in someone's tone before they realize they're upset. You sense when something is spiritually off, even if all the facts seem fine. This sensitivity isn't a weakness, it's depth. It's a form of spiritual perception that reads the emotional and energetic fields most people ignore. Over time, this gift forces you to create distance, not because you don't care, but because you feel everything. The problem isn't your intuition, it's that the world forgot how to listen to the language of the soul. You're not broken. You're just ahead of your time. You were born seeing what others spend decades trying to find, and your journey now is not to prove yourself to them, but to trust yourself, ground your gift, and protect your energy. Because this curse only feels like one when you seek validation from those who cannot see. The real task is to turn inward, honor what you feel, and remember that your sensitivity is not your flaw, it's your superpower. If you're still here, comment, "I'm awakening" below. Your voice helps us shape this journey. and your presence truly matters. 6. Stage 2. The curse emerges. You sense things before they're said. You feel the tension no one talks about, the sadness behind someone's smile, the betrayal that hasn't yet unfolded. It's not guesswork, it's a knowing that lives in your bones. You try to explain what you feel, but people dismiss you, misunderstand you, or accuse you of overthinking. So you begin to hide it. You start living a double life. On the surface, you laugh at the right times, say what's expected, and appear calm. But inside, you are flooded with spiritual impressions, subtle shifts in energy, invisible patterns playing out in every conversation. You're not just picking up emotions, you're absorbing them, and it's exhausting. The more you sense, the more others seem to resist your truth. You don't even have to speak it. Your presence alone feels like a mirror they didn't ask for. They feel exposed. Not because you judge them, but because you see through them. Carl Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darkness of other people. But when your presence reflects their hidden wounds, many would rather reject you than face themselves. Over time, your insight becomes a curse. You second-guess your inner voice. You start wondering if something's wrong with you. You become isolated not because you want to be alone, but because the surface world feels hollow. Shallow conversations drain you. Loud rooms overwhelm you. You crave depth, silence, and connection that doesn't require you to shrink your soul. This silence breeds pressure. The pressure becomes pain. And that pain splits into 3 traps: self-doubt, isolation, and burnout. First, you doubt your gift. You ask, "Why can I feel what others deny?" Second, you retreat into solitude, not for peace, but because it's the only place you can breathe. And third, you grow tired of pretending, of filtering, of holding back what your spirit knows to be true. You're not weak. You're not too sensitive. You're spiritually awake in a world that often prefers sleep. And this burden is heavy, but it's also sacred. You were never meant to fit in. You were meant to transform. You were never meant to be believed by everyone. You were meant to believe in yourself, even when no one else does. Being an intuitive introvert isn't just a personality trait. It's a soul contract. It means carrying light through dark spaces, speaking truth that no one else dares to name, and feeling everything because your presence was designed to heal. It's why you feel more. It's why you know more. But with that gift comes the responsibility to protect your energy, to stop apologizing for your depth, and to recognize that your spiritual sensitivity is not a flaw. It's a form of intelligence the world doesn't yet fully understand. You are not here to be understood by everyone. You are here to remind those who forgot how to feel, how to listen, how to see. And though that path may feel lonely, it is also divine. If this stage resonates with your experience, living between what you see and what you can't say, don't forget to subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. We explore the hidden layers of perception and how to carry this gift without letting it crush your soul. 7. Stage 3. Integration, the way out. The third stage, integration, is not just the rarest, but the most spiritually transformative part of the journey for intuitive introverts who have long carried the burden of sensing too much. It demands a level of inner mastery that few reach because it asks you to not only survive your sensitivity, but to turn it into structured power. The first essential skill in this stage is to strengthen sensation, a spiritual regrounding into the physical world. For decades, You may have lived in your mind, in your visions, your predictions, your feelings, floating above the noise of reality while being overwhelmed by it. But now, you must return to your body like a warrior returning to his armor. Walk with presence, not just to move, but to feel the ground. Cook not just to eat, but to engage with heat, texture, and nourishment. Tend to plants, clean your space, move with deliberate intention. Every physical act becomes a ritual that anchors you back into your soul's home, the body. This is how the unconscious flood begins to subside, not by resisting it, but by balancing it through embodiment. Carl Jung once said, "The body is your mind's best friend." And when you honor it, you regain control over your spiritual channel. Once grounded, the next sacred task is to translate the invisible. You can no longer afford to keep what you see and feel locked within. Your intuitive gifts, those flashes of knowing, those psychic impressions, those energetic truths, are only isolating when they are not given form. Expression is your redemption. Write the dreams that haunt you. Paint the energies you sense. Speak the patterns others don't notice. Build frameworks, draw maps, invent language to help people understand what lives beneath the surface of their own awareness. You do not need to explain everything, but you must give people something they can hold. It's how your soul stops whispering only to you and begins teaching others. And in doing so, your isolation turns into leadership. Jung believed the soul was both the source of deep feeling and deep creativity, and when those two meet, transformation is inevitable. Translation turns you from misunderstood into messenger. But none of this can unfold without the third mastery, setting boundaries. As you open to deeper truths, you must also learn when to close. Your intuitive channel cannot be left exposed to every energy that walks by. You must choose when to listen, when to block, and when to disengage. This is not avoidance, it is spiritual hygiene. Say no when your nervous system says, stop. Walk away when your energy begins to drain. Pause and ask, is this mine to carry? Because not every feeling belongs to you. And without boundaries, even a gift becomes poison. You need space between your soul and the noise of the world. Just like the lungs need to exhale, your energy needs release and renewal. Discernment becomes your sword and shield. Integration is not becoming numb, it's becoming sovereign. And only when you combine these three skills, grounding in sensation, translating the invisible, and protecting your soul's doorway, can you truly begin to live as the powerful, intuitive man you were always meant to be. Have you ever tried grounding your intuition through something physical, like writing, painting, or tending to a garden? If yes, share your experience in the comments so others can learn from you. If not, comment, I will begin the integration to step into this rare and transformational path with us. 8. The path forward. Most people will never truly grasp what it means to live with a radar that detects emotions, energy shifts, and unspoken truths the moment you step into a room. You feel tension behind polite smiles, sadness hidden beneath laughter, and dishonesty masked by charm. You sense everything, yet when you speak on it, you're met with disbelief, indifference, or ridicule. This is the silent burden of intuitive, introverted spiritual receptors in a world that glorifies noise and dismisses depth. Carl Jung, the pioneering voice of analytical psychology, once warned that those with heightened intuition often suffer not because of what they know, but because of how profoundly they know it. It's not just knowledge, it's soul-deep awareness. And while others casually drift through the surface of life, you are submerged in the undercurrents, absorbing the unseen stories that shape every room, every conversation, every interaction. You watch people move through life, oblivious to their contradictions. Yet you pick up on every inconsistency, the way someone's words betray their energy, the moment someone's smile fades ever so slightly when another person enters the room. You may not always have evidence, but you carry truth in your body. And when you speak from that inner knowing, they think you're imagining things, exaggerating, or being too emotional. But 3 months later, your instincts prove right. This is the paradox. Your gift is powerful, yet it isolates you. You see patterns before they unfold, sense danger before it arrives, and feel betrayal before it's admitted. You're not paranoid. You're perceptive. Yet the weight of knowing without validation can wear down even the strongest soul. Carl Jung emphasized that becoming your true self is the greatest privilege of a lifetime. But for intuitive introverts, that path often begins in exile. Because before your gift is recognized, it is rejected even by you. A man once shared how, for decades, he numbed his intuition to be accepted. Called too sensitive since childhood, he learned to mask his insights, silence his instincts, and conform to emotional shallowness. But after a personal crisis shattered his mask, he sought help from a Jungian therapist who taught him to reconnect with his inner voice. That voice, once silenced, became his guide. He began journaling, meditating, writing poetry, and simple acts that helped him remember who he was before the world told him to forget. Today, he mentors others who feel lost, guiding them not through logic, but through presence. His story is not rare. It is the quiet legacy of many intuitive souls who transmute rejection into wisdom and pain into purpose. When integrated, intuitive introverts become more than feelers. They become healers, pattern breakers, emotional architects. They see chaos and turn it into clarity. They don't just reflect the world, they reinterpret it through the lens of the soul. Though less than 2% of the population may understand your depth, history has always been shaped by the few who dared to see beyond what was visible. Your sensitivity is not weakness. Your intuition is not imagination. Your soul is not confused. It's just been waiting for you to stop explaining yourself and start embodying your truth. Carl Jung believed that true healing begins in the individual soul, not in society. So don't wait for the world to believe you. Believe in your own knowledge, because what others call too much is actually a mirror they're not ready to look into. And what feels like a curse is often the very thing the world is quietly starving for. If this message resonates with your soul, leave a comment of strength. My gift is sacred. I will carry it with clarity and courage. And if you've walked this path of integration, share your wisdom below your story, maybe the light someone else is searching for. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next step on this journey. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the unseen world of intuitive introverts who sense everything, yet are so often misunderstood. If this message resonated with you or made you feel a little more seen, you're not alone. Your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a sacred gift. As Carl Jung once said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. If you found value in today's video, Please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming insights into the soul, consciousness, and personal transformation. Until next time, stay true to your inner wisdom. Why a fed-up empath is more dangerous than the narcissist ever knew. Beware the fury of a patient man. This powerful quote by John Dryden reminds us that even the most compassionate souls have their limits. Today, on Spiritual Wisdom, we're diving deep into what Carl Jung uncovered about the hidden strength of empaths and what happens when that strength is pushed too far. This isn't just a story of emotional breaking points. It's a revelation of inner power, shadow integration, and the moment the empath awakens to their true potential. As you listen, ask yourself, what boundaries have you ignored for the sake of peace? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this resonates with you, don't forget to like and subscribe to support this journey of truth and transformation. 1. Empaths are mistaken for weak, but they hold hidden power. People often mistake empaths for weak, fragile, or overly sensitive, but what they fail to see is the immense power hidden beneath that softness. According to Carl Jung, every human carries both light and shadow within, and empaths are no exception. In fact, they live in constant contact with both. Their soul doesn't merely reflect love and compassion. It absorbs chaos, deception, and the suppressed emotional undercurrents of others. This ability isn't a flaw. It's a deep form of emotional intelligence. Empaths feel what others won't even acknowledge. They carry burdens silently, often without retaliation, because their nature is to heal, not harm. But even the strongest soul has a threshold. And when an empath reaches that breaking point, when they finally snap, it isn't loud or violent. It's quiet, calculated, and soul-shaking. Carl Jung's theory of the shadow is essential here. The shadow represents the unconscious, darker parts of our psyche that we hide from ourselves and the world. While narcissists run from their shadow and project it onto others, empaths confront it. They face not only their own darkness, but the shadow of everyone they've ever loved, helped, or tried to fix. Over time, this weight either breaks them or awakens them. And when it awakens them, something irreversible happens. The empath stops absorbing and starts discerning. They stop rescuing and start remembering. Their soul remembers its value, its limits, and its mission. What the narcissist never sees coming is that the empath's silence is not surrender, it's transformation. They no longer argue, explain, or defend. They detach. They walk away. And in doing so, they shift the entire dynamic. The narcissist, who once fed off the empath's emotional labor, suddenly finds themselves starving. No drama to feed on, no reaction to manipulate, no guilt to weaponize. Just silence, pure, powerful silence. And in that silence, the empath becomes untouchable. Not because they've grown colder, but because they've become clearer. They have integrated their light and shadow. They've become whole. Jung once said that wholeness is achieved when we accept both our darkness and our light. The empath, after years of spiritual and emotional labor, finally embraces this truth. They don't seek revenge. They seek peace. And that, to the manipulator, is the most devastating loss of all. To the outside world, the empath's snapping may look like distance, indifference, or aloofness. But inside, it's a soulful realignment. It's years of betrayal, neglect, in spiritual exhaustion, finally giving way to clarity. The empath no longer plays small. They no longer twist themselves into knots to be understood or accepted. They realize that their soul was never meant to be a sponge for someone else's toxicity. It was meant to be a beacon, a force of presence and discernment. And when that realization takes root, the empath no longer fears being misunderstood. They've seen the truth. They've felt the cost. And now they choose themselves not out of selfishness, but out of sacred necessity. Have you ever felt like your sensitivity was a burden? If so, share how you've learned to turn it into strength in the comments below. Your story could inspire someone else. If not, comment, "I will embrace it," and let's discover the hidden power of empaths together. 2. Pain and betrayal accelerate their transformation. Empaths don't just wake up one day transformed. They are forced into growth by pain that cuts deep. Repeated emotional abuse, manipulation, and betrayal don't just break them. They awaken something ancient and powerful within. Carl Jung believed that only through deep suffering can we encounter the shadow of the hidden self that holds our denied rage, grief, strength, and truth. For the empath, betrayal isn't just a heartbreak. It's the ignition of their psychological rebirth. They are the ones who keep forgiving, keep showing up, keep absorbing the chaos of those around them, especially narcissists, until one day the emotional weight becomes unbearable. They snap not with violence, not with bitterness, but with clarity. They stop explaining themselves. They stop shrinking to make others comfortable. They stop trying to earn love from people who trade in control. That's when everything changes. The narcissist, so used to dominance, doesn't see the shift coming. They don't realize the empath has been quietly gathering strength in silence, gathering pieces of their soul from every betrayal, every insult, every moment of neglect. This shift is not theatrical. It's internal. It's calm. It's grounded. But it is absolute. Like a woman who has always sacrificed herself for others, her partner, her children, her job, until one day she walks into her kitchen, drops the dinner she's cooking, and simply says, "No more." Not out of rage, but out of reverence for her own life. She cancels plans she didn't want to agree to. She lets the phone ring. She returns to herself. That is the moment of rebirth. That is the day the empath snaps. And when she does, she doesn't try to make others understand. She no longer needs validation from those who never respected her boundaries in the first place. Carl Jung taught that individuation, becoming your true self, only begins when the shadow is integrated. Betrayal is often the gateway to this for empaths. They must face what they've been denying: their own unmet needs, their anger, their longing for respect, their fear of being alone. When they finally stop betraying themselves to keep others comfortable, their energy shifts. They no longer attract chaos because they've stopped vibrating in survival mode. They begin to choose peace, even if it means solitude. They begin to speak with authority, even if their voice shakes. They begin to protect their energy, even if it disappoints others. The soul of the empath is no longer for rent. It becomes sacred space. Let this be a reminder that your pain has meaning. If you're an empath who's been broken by betrayal, understand this: the crack is where your soul steps forward. You don't have to seek revenge. You don't have to prove anything. Your transformation will be your power. Your silence will be your strength. and your boundaries will speak louder than any argument ever could. Betrayal didn't end you. It revealed you. And now that you see your shadow, you don't fear the darkness anymore. You've become it, mastered it, and walked through it with grace. That's what the narcissist never saw coming. If this message resonates with your journey, comment below. Rebirth through pain to affirm your transformation. 3. The emergence of the self makes them unstoppable. By confronting their pain and integrating their trauma, empaths begin the sacred process of becoming what Carl Jung called the individuated self, a complete whole being no longer fragmented by the expectations, manipulations, or emotional chaos of others. What makes this transformation so powerful is that it isn't just emotional, it's deeply spiritual. This isn't about becoming someone new. It's about remembering who they were before the world conditioned them to stay small. For years, the empath was the silent giver, the one who softened their voice to avoid conflict, who absorbed the wounds of others while silently bleeding inside. But there comes a moment, subtle, quiet, yet irreversible, when the empath stops seeking permission to exist. And in that moment, they awaken a force that cannot be controlled, manipulated, or suppressed. They no longer dance around dysfunction to keep the peace. They no longer tolerate energy that disturbs their spirit. And they no longer hand over their emotional sovereignty just to avoid being misunderstood. What Jung understood is that real transformation does not happen through external validation, but through inner integration. And once the empath begins this journey, they no longer operate from a place of fear, guilt, or self-doubt. Instead, they move with spiritual authority, calm, centered, and unshakable. Their boundaries are no longer a desperate plea to be respected. They are declarations of self-worth. Their silence is no longer submission, it is discernment. And their presence no longer exists to comfort the uncomfortable. It exists to reflect truth. When the empath finally snaps, it isn't loud. It's surgical. It's the quiet withdrawal of energy, attention, and access. It's the moment they stop explaining themselves to those committed to misunderstanding them. It's when they walk away, not to punish, but to protect the peace they had to fight so hard to find. And that's what the narcissist never saw coming. Not the outburst, but the stillness. Not the rage, but the detachment. Not the tears, but the gaze that sees through every mask. There is nothing more dangerous to manipulation than an empath who sees clearly. Because once they recognize the pattern, they no longer participate in it. They stop trying to fix what they didn't break. They stop negotiating with chaos. And they stop romanticizing someone else's potential at the cost of their own power. This evolution is not only psychological, it is spiritual warfare waged in silence. Jung said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." The empath, who once feared abandonment, now embraces solitude as sanctuary. The one who once bent over backward to prove their love now sits in stillness, knowing that the right people feel it without needing to be convinced. They become the embodiment of truth without performance, of compassion without martyrdom, and of love without self-abandonment. Their energy becomes rare, sacred, and untouchable. And because they have walked through the fire and refused to be consumed by it, their very presence becomes a sermon, a spiritual vibration that says, I am no longer available for anything that costs me my peace. 4. Emotional intelligence becomes a strategic superpower. Emotional intelligence, when refined through hardship and wisdom, becomes a soul-level superpower. The empath is no longer just a feeler. He is a strategist. He doesn't merely absorb emotions. He studies them, tracks patterns, and stores data in silence. Every sigh, every fake smile, every shift in tone, he sees it all. But unlike those who use manipulation to dominate, the empath waits. He waits not because he's weak, but because his soul is gathering evidence, aligning with truth, and preparing to act with the kind of clarity that shatters illusions. The narcissist, blinded by their own performance, never notices this process. They confuse empathy with gullibility, silence with submission, and kindness with compliance. What they fail to realize is that the empath has been evolving the entire time spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, becoming more aware of the soul contracts playing out in the background of their relationships. The day the empath snaps isn't dramatic, it's decisive. It's not a loud explosion, but a soul recalibration. It happens when the empath no longer reacts, no longer defends, and no longer explains. His energy shifts from seeking peace to enforcing peace. He no longer pleads to be heard, understood, or appreciated. That need dissolved when he remembered who he truly is. And that's what the narcissist never anticipated, that the very one they fed off would become immune to their tactics, that the supply they took for granted would cut the cord with complete emotional neutrality. The empath's withdrawal is not abandonment, it is liberation. His silence is not absence, it is judgment. His boundaries are not walls, they are gates to sacred ground, where only truth and reciprocity are welcome. Years of absorbing pain taught the empath how to transform it. What once felt like emotional flooding has turned into razor-sharp discernment. He no longer doubts his intuition because his soul speaks louder than fear. He doesn't chase clarity because he is clarity. His forgiveness is not a free pass. It's a conscious release that protects his vibration. What the narcissist once weaponized emotional sensitivity, compassion, patience, has now become the empath's armor. The empath doesn't seek revenge. He doesn't need to. His detachment is the echo that haunts the narcissist long after he's gone, a spiritual consequence far more powerful than words. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow of the repressed self that holds both danger and transformation. The empath has faced his shadow, integrated it, and emerged not bitter, but bold. His soul no longer tolerates relationships that cost him his peace, his dignity, or his purpose. Now, his presence demands authenticity. His time requires honesty. His heart only opens where respect resides. And the narcissist, so used to chaos, finds themselves lost in the silence of being irrelevant. Because once the empath awakens, his love is no longer free. It must be earned. He no longer carries broken dynamics. He buries them. He no longer bleeds to prove his worth. He reigns in the sacred stillness of someone who finally remembered his soul was never meant to be caged. If you believe emotional intelligence is your hidden superpower, don't hesitate to like, subscribe, and share your reflections in the comments below. Let's unlock this gift together. 5. They detach with clarity, not fear. They don't walk away in weakness. They walk away in wisdom. When an empath awakens, something irreversible happens. They stop trying to decode mixed signals, fix broken promises, or explain themselves to someone who was never truly listening. They no longer bleed just to keep someone else warm. Carl Jung once said, "True power is detachment, born from understanding." And this is exactly what happens when the empath finally sees the truth. They don't lash out. They don't beg for change. They don't wait for apologies that will never come. They detach with clarity, not fear, and that clarity becomes their liberation. The narcissist, so used to control through chaos and guilt, never expects it. They expect tears, not silence. They expect another round of explanation, not quiet certainty. But when the empath stops reacting, when they choose peace over performance, they dissolve the narcissist's illusion of dominance. No confrontation is needed, just calm, decisive distance. That is the moment everything changes, not because the empath became colder, but because they became clear. I knew a man who gave everything to someone who only saw him as a supply, not a soul. He dimmed his light, lowered his voice, walked on emotional eggshells for years. Every time he tried to leave, guilt pulled him back. Every time he tried to set a boundary, manipulation twisted it. Until one day, he stopped explaining. He stopped defending his heart. He simply said, "I understand," and never looked back. That moment of stillness shattered everything the narcissist thought they controlled. She didn't get closure. She got silence, and in that silence was power. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of reclaiming the lost parts of yourself by integrating your shadow and becoming whole. For empaths, this means understanding that your compassion is not a weakness. Your desire to heal is beautiful, but it should never come at the cost of your own soul. The pain was not your fault, but your healing is your responsibility. And walking away is not abandonment, it's alignment. When the empath detaches, it isn't cold-hearted, it's soul-preserving. They stop showing up for conversations that only go in circles. They stop proving their worth to people who already made up their minds. They stop making homes in people who thrive on their confusion. They rise not loudly, but deeply. And that rising is what the narcissist never saw coming. The one they called too sensitive, too emotional, or too much, becomes the one who no longer answers their call. That's not revenge. That's transformation. And it's what happens when the soul finally says, enough. Carl Jung believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. But once the empath becomes conscious of the pattern, the cycle ends. They no longer serve roles that drain them. They rewrite the script. They choose relationships rooted in respect, not roles rooted in survival. And in doing so, they don't just escape the narcissist, they reclaim themselves. The lesson is simple but profound. Detachment is not about giving up on people. It's about giving up on the illusion that your worth depends on their approval. That clarity is your awakening. That stillness is your freedom. Do you feel the power of clarity over chaos? If this message speaks to your soul, declare it in the comments. I detach with clarity, not fear. And if this truth resonates, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Your voice might be the light someone else needs. 6. They reflect truth instead of absorbing pain. There comes a moment in an empath's spiritual journey when they stop being the emotional dumping ground for others and start becoming the sacred mirror that reflects hidden truths. For so long, they've absorbed the dysfunction, the manipulation, and the silent cruelty of those who mistook their compassion for weakness. But an empath isn't weak. They are simply spiritually tuned to frequencies most people ignore. They carry a depth of feeling, a sensitivity so refined it becomes both a gift and a burden. Carl Jung once described this as the return of the repressed, a moment when all that has been silenced is inner power, clarity, discernment, erupts not in rage, but in divine truth. It's not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. The empath begins to see that saving everyone was never their job. Their role was never to bleed for others, but to awaken themselves. And in that awakening, something shifts. They stop absorbing pain and begin reflecting dysfunction back to its source, not through vengeance, but through unshakable spiritual awareness. When this shift happens, everything changes. The empath's silence is no longer submission. It becomes wisdom. Their softness transforms into boundaries carved with clarity. They no longer explain themselves to those committed to misunderstanding them. They no longer engage with emotional chaos or tolerate the narcissist's need for control masked as charm. What once kept them captive, guilt, shame, over-responsibility, now dissolves in the light of their own self-respect. This is not arrogance. It's alignment. The narcissist, who once thrived on power games and confusion, now finds no entry point. Why? Because the empath no longer plays. They've stepped out of the role they were cast in and stepped into their soul's authority. No arguments, no drama, just quiet, unwavering presence. That presence, born from deep inner healing, is more powerful than any defense. The narcissist never expected it. They believed the empath would always stay, always fix, always forgive. But when the empath awakens, they do none of those things. They observe, they understand, and then they let go. The power of this transformation lies in its subtlety. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with inner peace. You'll notice it when the empath stops reacting, when they stop defending, when they stop shrinking to make others comfortable. They reclaim their time, their energy, their voice not loudly, but intentionally. They become sovereign over their own soul. And in doing so, they reflect back a truth so sharp that it exposes every mask, every manipulation, every lie. This is not revenge. This is spiritual justice. It is the empath standing in the wholeness of their being, no longer hiding, no longer apologizing, no longer carrying wounds that were never theirs to begin with. And from this place, they no longer seek to be chosen by anyone. They have chosen themselves. They have remembered who they are. And that is the day the narcissist meets a truth they cannot charm, control, or destroy. Because it doesn't react, it reflects. And in that reflection, the empath reclaims their soul. If this message speaks to your soul, declare it now. I no longer absorb pain. I reflect truth with power and clarity. Let it be your affirmation today. 7. The awakened empath is a force of nature. When an empath finally embraces both his tenderness and his truth, he becomes something the narcissist never anticipated. A soul no longer willing to bleed for those who feed on his silence. For years, he was the peacekeeper, the forgiver, the one who stayed gentle in storms that were never his to calm. He gave love like oxygen, thinking it was his spiritual duty to heal even those who never asked to be healed. But beneath that kindness lived a fire, a knowing, buried deep, waiting for the day he would remember that love does not mean sacrifice, without boundary, and empathy is not an invitation to be used. That day, the soul awakens. Carl Jung described this transformation as becoming psychologically complete when light and shadow merge, when the man who once bent now stands not in bitterness, but in quiet, unshakable clarity. And that's when everything changes. Not because he screams, not because he fights, but because he no longer needs to. The narcissist, accustomed to feeding off his attention, validation, and emotional labor, is blindsided by this shift. Because what they never understood was that the empath's softness was never weakness. It was restraint. It was power held back for the sake of harmony. But now, that harmony costs too much. The empath no longer explains himself, no longer negotiates his peace. His soul, once fragmented by self-doubt and guilt, becomes whole in its own silence. The same heart that once overextended now draws clear lines in the sand, not with anger, but with certainty. He no longer fights for connection that drains him. He no longer doubts what he feels. And most of all, he no longer waits for others to value what he had to beg to give. That internal shift becomes his liberation, a soulful moment of awakening where self-respect becomes louder than fear, and spiritual integrity takes the place of emotional survival. As this man integrates his shadows, the unspoken rage, the buried grief, the exhaustion from years of emotional labor, he doesn't lose his kindness. He gains discernment. He sees manipulation for what it is, and he doesn't flinch. He trusts the silence between words. He recognizes chaos disguised as love, and he walks away without a second thought. His boundaries are no longer walls built from pain, but gates protected by wisdom. His energy becomes selective, his time sacred. And the narcissist, who once fed on his emotional overextension, finds nothing left to control. Because the awakened empath is no longer reactive, he is rooted. No need to prove, no need to chase, no need to fix. He simply is. A man who once lived to be chosen now chooses himself. A soul that once feared abandonment now honors solitude. He doesn't seek revenge. He embodies recovery. He doesn't need closure. He is the door. And the most spiritual part of all is that he doesn't hate the narcissist. He just sees them clearly for the first time. That clarity, that stillness, that soul-deep peace is what terrifies those who once depended on his confusion. If this message has stirred something powerful within you, declare it in the comments. I embrace my light and shadow. I am whole, awakened, and unstoppable. And remember, the quietest souls often hold the fiercest strength. When the empath finally snaps, it's not chaos, it's clarity. Carl Jung taught us that within every light dwells a shadow, and sometimes that shadow rises to protect the light. If this message resonated with you, don't keep it to yourself. Like, share, and pass it on to someone who needs it. Subscribe to Spiritual Wisdom and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next powerful insight on your journey of awakening. Until next time, stay strong, stay centered, and honor your inner truth.